What's up, y'all? This is Bella D. Welcome back to Books for Crooks. We're back with another read this week, but this week I kind of wanted to start off different, and I just wanted to say that reading out loud is hard, and I'm a f up, and I want you to see me f up because I want you to see me grow, so you can see that within yourself, that whatever we do and we're consistent at, we're gonna get better. So let's roll. We're gonna be reading From Trouble to Triumph, True Stories of Redemption from Drugs, Gangs, and Prison. It's a book about some homeboys' stories from SGV, and I'm going to be reading Freddy Negrete's story. Freddy Coyote Negrete. Freddy Negrete's feet felt heavy. The walk into the intensive care unit was not far, but each step felt like a mile. When he opened the door and entered the room, the sound of machines beeping and pumping air greeted him. As he looked closer, he realized those machines were keeping his 15-year-old son alive. Just an hour before, he had received a call that his youngest son, Lorenzo, had been shot. He had hoped that he had been hit in the leg or the arm, but his instinct knew better. He had dreamt this before, losing his son. There was no turning back from this moment, the machines or his son's lifeless body. And just like that, Lorenzo Frosty Negrete was gone. Shot in the head and killed due to the same gang violence on the same streets his father had once lived La Vida Loca decades before. Freddy was no stranger to pain, and his life had been filled with struggle, but nothing compared to this. I blame myself even to this day, he said. I wanted him to stay home off the streets, but my words fell on deaf ears. From his perspective of my past, I was no moral authority. I was a role model to him, but in the wrong way. In the ICU room, an energy filled the air, circulating above the hospital bed like a storm gathering. The Negrete family was no stranger to gang violence. Freddy knew that life, but his history went further than him. Back to the late 1950s when Freddy's parents also lived a violent lifestyle as gang members. Freddy became a ward of the state at age 2, a toddler, and he and his sister Vicky were put into a foster home after his parents were sent to prison. His mother, a Jewish immigrant, fell hard for his father, a Chicano Pachuco with gang ties. Their courtship was brief, and soon after having their children, Freddy's father, Fernando, committed armed robbery and was sent to prison. His mother, Jacqueline, who had dyed her hair black and joined Oil Maravilla gang, was also sent to prison, but for manslaughter after using a homemade zip gun and shooting another girl in the heart during a fight. I remember my sister and I getting out of the car at the foster home and standing on their front lawn and 5 kids coming out, and they were excited we were there. They were yelling, "They're here, they're here." His foster parents were Mormon and white, a baby really. Freddy grew up using his foster family's last name, Barker. From the outside community, his foster parents were praised for taking in 2 orphan siblings. They were even named Foster Parents of the Year and featured in LA Times. Appearances, however, are not always what they seem. Behind closed doors, the Barker household was filled with emotional and physical abuse, mostly aimed at Freddy and his sister. In the little time, the foster parents' racial prejudice against Chicanos surfaced, and they would belittle the children at any opportunity. Their methods of discipline were always physical, and Freddy described them as trying to beat the Mexican out of me. His older sister had it worse. Her foster father sexually abused her. To scare silence into the children, the foster parents threatened to separate the siblings by sending them to different orphanages. As a result of this abusive lifestyle, Freddy seemed to run away from home. Freddy started to run away from home. He spent a lot of time at Venice Beach, where his light complexion and white surname served as a combination of his first identity, a white surfer kid on the boardwalk. Without any supervision, at age 11, he dropped his first high-dose acid tab. He would leave home for days at a time, sleeping under the pier with close to 40 other runaways. After getting caught, he was taken to LA County Juvenile Hall, where he waited for his foster parents to get him. While in a holding cell, Freddy felt nervous. He had grown up in white communities, and the blacks and cholos were intimidating to him. Soon after, an older Chicano teenager walked into the cell. His gang name was Buckwheat, and he was a member of the Lopez Maravilla gang in East LA. He was covered in prison-style tattoos. Freddy had never seen anything like that before. Maybe because we were the only ones in the holding cell and I was a surfer kid, Buckwheat was nice to me. He said he told me about tattooing and what I needed to make them and how. When Freddy returned to his foster family's home, he went to his room with a needle and thread and his sister's mascara and started hand-poking his first tattoo. I was trying to do my name, he remembered, looking down at the faded ink on his hand. I realized it was a harder process than I had thought. I made it crooked. I was 12 years old. During this time, Freddy decided to change his identity. He no longer wanted to be the surfer kid. He spent more time away from home and started getting into more trouble. I looked for it. I would break into cars and we would throw rocks through business windows. We were always drinking. Labeled incorrigible by a judge, Freddy was sent to a boys' home where he met Ruben Martinez, who was a Lomas gang member. Freddy wanted to look and act like Ruben, impressed with his cholo style, but Freddy only had what he described as surfer clothes that his foster mother had picked out for him. Ruben told Freddy the boys' home would take the kids to get clothes and showed him what he needed to have cholo style. Raised white, Freddy found he had a lot more to learn besides what clothes to wear if he wanted to be a cholo. Ruben started teaching me how to talk, the slang to use. He even taught me how to stand straight. After this time with Ruben, Freddy wanted to return to San Gabriel. He ran away from home, not the same man. I went into the barrio, he said. I found some kids I went to school with and they said, "Hey, it's Freddy Barker." I stood tall and said, "That's not my name. Don't ever call me that. My dad is Mexican. My name is Freddy Negrete. I want to join the barrio." At 13, Freddy was jumped into the Sangra gang and given the gang name Coyote. It was 1969. I felt like I found myself finally and found my place with my people, he said. They took care of each other. That same day, I had a warrant out for my arrest for leaving the boys' home, and one of the homeboys' families took me in, no questions asked. It was almost like I was making my own family and my own friends, he said. As he did this, he learned more about Latino culture. I was like a homeless kid then because my foster parents didn't want me anymore. The Latino parents let me stay in their home since I was in 4th grade. I learned what they eat and all the customs. I learned it because it was so important to me. Other kids in the neighborhood only saw him as the white kid trying to be Mexican, and this angered Freddy because he wanted to forget that part of him. Just kids asking if I was Freddy Barker would set me off, he said. I would fight them right then and there. I realized I had to be tougher to prove myself more. The neighborhood gave him a sense of loyalty, of family, that Freddy had never had before. It was the Latino culture thing, I think, he said. Cholos identify with their neighborhood and they loved ones with pride. And their loved ones with pride. That's how I wanted to be, and that's how I am. During this time, Freddy was caught and arrested for leaving the boys' home and was sent to juvenile fire camp program. He had a heart murmur, so he received a medical hold from physical aspects of the program and spent the next 4 months inside the facility. There he met Pom Pom, a Maravilla gang member who also was on medical hold for having his leg amputated. His sister had thrown a record at his leg, cutting it, and the infection resulted in gangrene. Pom Pom was a great artist. Freddy also had the gift, and the two would spend a lot of time drawing together. The staff gave us paper because it kept us busy. He said, meeting Pom Pom was a turning point in my life because he was from Mexico, and he knew how to draw the Mexican culture tattoos. He would draw the crosses, ribbons, roses, cholos, and women. I had been tattooing for a couple months by then, so I didn't need to know about the techniques anymore. Pom Pom taught me the imagery of cholo life and culture. When Freddy returned home, he soon was known as the neighborhood tattoo artist. By age 15, his arms were covered with tattoos. After the fire camp, Freddy's parents agreed to let him live with them again. He also decided he should try and go back to school. At this time, Sangra was engaged in heavy conflict with its rival gang, Lomas. The school counselor did not believe Freddy was ready to return to regular high school. He was placed in continuation school where they sent Lomas gang members in the morning and Sangra members in the afternoon. Freddy told the counselor he was not a gang member. The counselor insisted that he was. With Freddy not budging to make his point, the counselor enrolled Freddy in the morning session with the Lomas members. Conflict was rising, but not in full force between the gangs, so things were not as bad as Freddy thought they would be. The kid who taught him how to be a cholo, Ruben Martinez, was there. He told other Lomas members that Freddy was cool. In class, we would all joke around together, but once we broke for lunch, I had to stay by myself, Freddy recalled. Graffiti was a main communicator between the gangs, and it sparked tension between them. Freddy remembers when Lomas gang members tagged freeway signs as theirs in neutral territory. To retaliate, Freddy and other Sangra members went to tag over them and cross them out. At one point, one of Freddy's homeboys went into Lomas and started to cross out other signs there and then signed it Alex, Tony, and Freddy, their nicknames. On the bus to school, Freddy saw the signs and knew there would be trouble. I went to the bathroom and they were all there. I told him I didn't want trouble with them, that I had nothing to do with it, but things were never the same. Chewy was the leader of Lomas then, and we were cool until that day. We became enemies that day to the point that I was in the car when we tried to shoot him. The days of fistfights and stabbings were few. This was a new era, the time for drive-by shootings. The element of surprise was the weapon of choice, and Freddy remembered seeing many homeboys die. Still, he never feared what was on the other side of the guns. He welcomed it, in fact. I never killed anybody, he said, but I remember I shot somebody, wanting to go back to finish him off. It was all or nothing back then. Jax, a Lomas member, was the one he shot. It happened after Jax heard that Freddy was fooling around with the same girl he was with and came out firing 6 shots at him. To retaliate, Freddy went to Jax's house, knocked on the window, and pretended to be a friend of his. "Hey Jax, it's the homies, it's party time," Freddy says as he tapped the window. Jax opened it and Freddy shot him. He thought he had killed him until he had heard Jax yell out, "You puto," ready to go back. Freddy's homeboys tried to persuade him to leave. They knew the cops were coming. Frustrated, Freddy complied, but quickly thought of another Lomas enemy of his. They jumped in the car and raced to the guy's house. When they were there, Freddy shot out all the house's front windows. By then, it was time to get out to San Gabriel. Racing to the freeway, their car was stopped for speeding. As the cop was about to let him go, a message came on the radio, shooting 2 gang members. The car was searched, the gun was found, Freddy was arrested. He didn't go to state prison. Instead, a judge sent him to Preston School of Industry, PSI, and sentenced him to 1 year. Freddy was not looking for trouble, especially after getting jumped for shooting Lomas members after he was arrested in LA County Jail. But here at PSI, Freddy had an advantage, his artistic talent. And that talent was sought. Inmates wanted tattoos, portraits, or cards to send home. The staff liked his work and provided him with a job at the print shop. Shortly after he arrived, Freddy designed the infamous "Smile Now, Cry Later" tattoo after seeing an advertisement for a theater production. He created flyers that were released in the outside public, which later caught the attention of his future mentor, American tattoo artist Ed Hardy. With less than 30 days left of his 12-month sentence, Freddy was busted for drug trafficking. He was sentenced to 3 years in a lockup facility called the Tamarack Program, which is known for housing violent offenders. This place was like an annex, a big castle. It was haunted and had 2 sides to it. One was the lockup side for discipline, and the other was the program for hardcore youth authority offenders. I had already been sending weed to the inmates there and the tattoo patterns when I was on the other side, so they were welcoming to me when I arrived, he said. These guys were covered in tattoos. The staff actually supplied them with the ink for their tattoo machines, he said. Freddy knew he would be expected to tattoo, but he had guidelines. I had policies if anybody tried to pressure me to tattoo them. I wasn't going to tolerate that. I had machines and I would tattoo every day. I was in high demand. My one rule was that I made my own schedule and there would be no line breaking that and no exclusivity. But guys started clicking, and when you make a click, you never have a problem with just one guy anymore, but instead the whole group of guys, he said. They told me they wanted me to be in their clique and to do all their tattoos exclusively. I told them they were all full of shit. A fight resulted. Soon after, Freddy became a marked man and he knew he was going to get jumped. The guys at the Tamarack, though, were not interested in fighting with fists. Nearly all the guys had shanks. Instead of giving in to the demands of the clique to turn on one of his homeboys, Freddy faced the chance of getting stabbed to death. The next day, Freddy was confronted in the kitchen and stabbed multiple times and kicked unconscious. He woke up in the hospital not knowing who or where he was. Everyone assumed he would go back under protective custody to avoid further conflict. Not Freddy. He insisted on going back. His reputation was on the line. Surprisingly, the clique that nearly killed him when he returned, they decided he had heart and left him alone. Freddy continued tattooing, impressing the staff with his talent. Soon the staff approved an early release date for him. On the outside, Chicanos were requesting colorless tattoos, but most shops were offering the Sailor Jerry-looking, more traditional tattoos. They were nothing fine-lined or with the black and gray look that Chicanos pioneered and is so popular today. Jack Rudy, an artist at Good Time Charlie's tattoo studio, who also is known as a master in black and gray tattooing, had seen Freddy's work and wanted to meet him. Jack had created an extended needle that could tattoo a finer line, making a tattoo smoother and more photo-like. Using that needle, Freddy's artistic talent impressed Jack after he tattooed a fish on Jack's leg. Good Time Charlie's had just been bought by Ed Hardy, a world-renowned tattoo pioneer and owner of the multi-million-dollar clothing company empire that holds his name. Ed saw something special that Freddy could bring to his shop. Freddy knew Chicano culture, and he learned the art of growing up in the barrio through his prison time. He offered something authentic and different. He was hired. After 2 years of Ed Hardy's mentorship, Freddy's tattooing was at an entirely different level, and people were beginning to notice. In 1980, he was named Tattoo Artist of the Year at the 5th World Tattoo Convention. A few years later, Eddie married Patricia and had his first son, Isaiah. He was 23 and remembered feeling how he felt ready for fatherhood. All my friends already had kids, he said. I had my tattooing job, we had our house, I was really ready. During this time, Freddy also struggled with his heroin addiction and had an affiliation for Super Cools, cigarettes dipped in PCP. His dependency and extramarital affairs led him to a point where he was ready to change his ways. He soon joined Victory Outreach, an organization aimed at reforming homeboys from gang life, violence, or substance abuse. He made the decision to give his life to Christ. He stopped drugs. He stopped tattooing. I was told that tattooing was the work of the devil, he said. So I quit at Good Time Charlie's. I remember telling Jack Rudy, I'm serving the Lord now. This religious awakening led Freddy to later join a church called the Brethren of Christ. He spent time in Amish country and came back ordained. He started serving as a pastor in his own church, the Living Word Brethren in Christ, dressing in custom-made zoot suits and inspiring his congregation with his powerful testimonies. He was a man of God, and his transformation brought Patricia and their family back together. Shortly after, he was caught cheating on her, and the relationship ended. Ashamed of his actions, Freddy left his role as a pastor and started using again. A few years later, he had a job but still struggled with drug addiction. To feed his habit, he started burglarizing homes. Sometimes he would do it on his lunch breaks. During this time, he met his second wife, Annabeth, who soon became pregnant with Lorenzo. News of her pregnancy made Freddy want to change his ways, so he went to a methadone program to get straight. They made plans to move to Palm Springs and have a fresh start. The LAPD had other plans. They had found Freddy's prints inside a home, and he was up on a burglary charge. With the help of a lawyer, he made bail and was not sentenced for 2 years. During that time, he was clean and taking his fatherhood role seriously. The cops testified he had changed. His sentence was reduced from 3 years to 1, and in 1989, he returned to LA County Jail. Freddy's talent impressed the staff there so much that the captain asked him to paint a large LA Sheriff's Department badge as a backdrop for press conferences. For his services, he was allowed to eat in the officers' dining room. Freddy's talent then caught the attention of Sheriff Sherman Block, who went to become the highest paid elected official in the country during his tenure. Mr. Block wanted a badge designed by Freddy for his dining room wall. In time, Freddy created a design that was officially approved and used for a fleet of LASD's police cars. He met Mr. Block once, and while they did not speak to each other, Mr. Block instructed the wardens to give Freddy access to his personal refrigerator, resulting in Freddy's meals consisting of prime ribs, steak, and more. Soon after, he was released on 3 years probation. Once he was out, some time went by, and Freddy felt restless with his life situation. He thought back to when he was tattooing and wondered if the best times of his life were behind him. He hadn't touched a tattoo gun in 10 years. He called Jack Rudy. Jack told Freddy that he was welcome back to the tattooing scene. Not only had he been missed, but his work had become legendary. Black and gray was sought after in the tattoo world, and the work that Freddy knew how to do was the work that people wanted. The first gig Jack had for Freddy was in San Diego. When Freddy picked up the tattoo gun, he felt the adrenaline pump in his veins. Indeed, he was back. Freddy was now known as the founder of Black and Gray Tattoos. His experience was even sought after the award-winning director Taylor Hackford while he was working on the 1993 film Blood and Blood Out, which involved 3 relatives who are in a gang and how this impacts their lives. The director needed the tattoos to look authentic, and it was Freddy who made the tattoos look real. More than 30 movie productions sought Freddy's perspective and expertise, and over the years he worked with big-time Hollywood directors, including James Cameron and William Friedkin. Even with this success, Freddy could not free himself from drug addiction. To avoid a drug test, he skipped a visit with his probation officer and put himself in violation of his parole. His ex-wife Patricia and Isaiah and Lorenzo was with his wife Annabeth. Freddy decided to turn himself in. He knew he had about a year to serve, and he did, and that would give him time to get clean. Then he could work to meet his latest goal, to open his own tattoo shop in Santa Barbara. Freddy left Hollywood behind to turn himself in, and he soon found himself behind bars. His artistic talent proved helpful there again. He returned to drawing murals, and in return for his services, he was given an emergency overcrowding release. There was no emergency, but his talent had freed him again. Soon after his release, Freddy's shop, Rat-a-Tattoo, opened in Santa Barbara. It had a 1930s theme, with his clientele ranged from bikers and musicians to construction workers to cops to sheriffs. The shop was a success, and soon Freddy moved Annabeth and Lorenzo to Santa Barbara to be with him, while also working on movie productions again. Everything was finally falling into place, or so it seemed, until the demons of addiction returned. In little time, his marriage, his family, and his business started to spiral out of Freddy's control. Then his shop was accused of tattooing a minor. Her parents sued, and the shop eventually closed as a result. It wasn't just the end of my business, he said. It was the end of my American dream. Annabeth soon left him and took Lorenzo with her. Freddy thought it would be a good time to take his older son to Hawaii to try to make ends meet there. By then, Isaiah had been tattooing for years. Despite their talent, they struggled and only stayed in Hawaii for a few months. Freddy's longtime friend Gil Monty had his shop, Tattoo Mania, in West Hollywood. When Gil reached out and offered Freddy and his son a regular gig at his shop, things felt as if they were finally going to improve. Work became steady, and Freddy hustled to tattoo and work on movie productions. But he still was partying hard. He loved his sons, but he was not living by example. At this time, Annabeth reached out to Freddy about Lorenzo, who was having major issues in school. She could not control him. She told Freddy she was ready to send him to juvenile institution to help him set straight. I knew she was desperate, Freddy said, but I had grown up in those institutions, bouncing from foster home to juvenile center and then to California CYA. I also knew where those places took me, the streets, to gangbanging, and eventually to prison. That was not the fate of my son. I fought for custody and won. Lorenzo would be with me. Freddy had not realized how deep La Vida Loca Lorenzo was. He would disappear for days at a time. Soon, Freddy learned that Lorenzo had become a Sangra gang member and was gangbanging hard. Then one night, Lorenzo came home with a gun. I was devastated, Freddy said. I was consumed with fear for my 15-year-old son. I felt as if I was watching the hand of destiny. I knew something was coming and it was going to be awful. But who was I to tell him what to do or not to do? Not even 30 years before him, I was out doing the same exact thing, he said. Like I said, I was a role model, but the wrong kind. Lorenzo's gang name was Frosty. Ironically, it was the same nickname Lorenzo had as a baby. He looked like a little snowman, so we called him that, Freddy remembered. Now, R.I.P. Frosty rests forever in an ink tribute around the front of Freddy's neck. My little baby boy, I lost him. Freddy never found out exactly what happened the night that Lorenzo was shot. It appears that someone walked up to him and stabbed. It appeared that someone walked up to him and shot him. Shootings became the main method of madness and retaliation since Freddy's own gang days, which included guns, but more often involved fistfights or stabbings. Decades later, during Lorenzo's time, the goal was to not miss your target. Drive-bys and walk-bys were best for this. Freddy does not yearn for his revenge for his son's death since he blames himself so much. In the months after Lorenzo's death, Freddy found it hard to get up in the morning and return to drugs to numb himself enough to function. Soon he was arrested and sent to prison. While Freddy was there, the one who suffered the most was his older son Isaiah. He was devastated at the death of his brother and was alone, living in someone's garage tattooing. Freddy worked to get clean while in prison, but the years of drug use had major consequences to his death. He suffered from congestive heart failure. Nevertheless, upon his release, he found Isaiah, and the two returned to Hollywood to tattoo and live together. Freddy's heart problems grew worse. At one point, the doctors told him the only solution would be a heart transplant. They told him that his heart was enlarged and that he was dying. He was still using and was caught and sent to Los Angeles County Jail again, but this time he could no longer walk, confined to a wheelchair and weak. He suffered 3 heart attacks there. He called his son and told him not to visit him. He didn't want Isaiah to see him that way. I still had my Christian background, you know, he said, and I decided I really needed to talk to God. I remember in order to find a place to be alone, I had to go up 2 flights of stairs. It took me more than 45 minutes because at each step I had to regain my strength. When I made it up there, I prayed and told God I could not make any promises, that I was not asking him to do anything in return for what I would do, because I knew that I had failed him before. Instead, I remembered a passage in the Old Testament wherein the prophet came to him and told him he was going to die, and he went directly to God and asked for more time, and God gave him 16 years. So I quoted that passage and asked for more time. I did not want to die that way. My son needed me. Please, God, don't let me die in jail. The next morning, Freddy had another heart attack. On the way to the hospital, Freddy felt different. This time, he felt the touch of God. 2 weeks later, doctors reported improvement. His heart was functioning better than before. He was able to eat again and sleep better. In little time, he did not need the wheelchair. Doctors were perplexed. Freddy's recovery was nothing short of a miracle. I knew I would never use again after that, said Freddy, who has remained clean since 2007. His recovery was supported by the Beit Shva returning home, a treatment facility based in Jewish spirituality and 12-step principles. He spent 6 months there, where he made peace with God, himself, and Lorenzo's death. Currently, Freddy tattoos at the Shamrocks Social Club in West Hollywood. He also volunteers his time at the Beit Shva, helping young heroin helping young heroin addicts recover from the same struggles he endured. A book about his life, Smile Now, Cry Later, Guns, Gangs, and Tattoos, My Life in Black and Gray, by Freddy Negrete with Steve Jones, was released in 2016 by 7 Stories Press, New York City. All right, y'all. That was A Trouble to Triumph. That was just Freddy's story. There's other empowering stories in this book, but if you want to know more about Freddy's, Smile Now, Cry Later by Freddy Negrete. It has all the details in here. So I'll leave you the link for both of them. Check them out. Till then, thank you for reading with us, and I'll catch y'all next week.